The man at the end of the counter hadn't touched his coffee in 4 minutes. Not because it was bad. He'd made a point of ordering something simple. Drip coffee, black, no name on the cup, just to see what came back. What came back was fine. What he couldn't get past was the way the girl behind the counter had slid it across without looking up. Not a word. Not even the basic courtesy of eye contact. Nolan Briggs had opened his first location 11 years ago with a mop, a borrowed espresso machine, and a lease he couldn't really afford. Now he owned seven locations across the metro area, 43 full-time employees, and a reputation in the industry for treating people right. He was 41 years old, wore a gray zip-up he'd had since grad school, and today he looked like exactly what he was pretending to be. Nobody in particular. He picked up the cup and took a slow sip. 2 registers down, the morning rush was thinning out. The woman who'd taken his order, her name tag said Brianna, was now leaning against the back counter with her phone out, thumb scrolling. The other cashier, a young man named Drew, was restocking the pastry case, but he kept glancing back at the door like he was waiting for someone to walk in so the shift could finally feel worth showing up to. It was a Tuesday, 10:40 in the morning. The store should have been prepped, clean, and ready. Nolan had reviewed the morning inspection logs the night before. Everything checked out on paper. Paper had a way of lying to you if the people filling it out knew nobody was watching. He'd gotten the idea 3 weeks ago when a regular customer, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Hopper, who'd been coming to the Meridian location every morning for 6 years, had quietly pulled him aside at a charity dinner and told him she'd stopped going in, just like that. After 6 years, he'd asked her why, and she'd looked at him the way people look at you when they're about to say something they've been holding for a while. "It's the atmosphere, Nolan," she said. "Something changed. I don't feel welcome anymore." He hadn't slept much after that. So he was here. Not as the owner. Not as anyone. Just a guy in a zip-up with a paper cup, sitting at the far end of the counter where the light wasn't great, and the stool was slightly wobbly, and nobody would think to notice him. Brianna was still on her phone. Drew had finished restocking and was now standing near the espresso bar, doing nothing in particular, arms folded, watching a video on his phone with the volume low but not low enough. Nolan could hear the faint tinny laugh track from where he sat. There were 3 other customers in the store. A woman by the window with a laptop, a couple near the door. None of them had been acknowledged since he walked in. Not a good morning, not a thank you for waiting, not even a nod. Then the door opened, and Nolan watched what happened next. She came in quietly, mid-60s, heavyset, moving slowly with a cane. She made her way to the counter and stood there for a moment, looking at the menu board. She had on a yellow raincoat even though it wasn't raining, and she set her bag carefully on the counter and smiled at Brianna. Brianna didn't look up from her phone. The woman waited. 10 seconds. 15. She glanced at Drew. Drew was watching his video. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I'm sorry to bother you." Brianna sighed in a way that was almost theatrical, the kind of sigh designed to communicate inconvenience without quite saying it out loud. She put her phone face down on the counter and walked over with the expression of someone who had agreed to be here but wanted it understood that they had not agreed to enjoy it. "What do you want?" Brianna said. "Not what can I get you? Not good morning. What do you want?" The woman in the yellow raincoat didn't flinch. She smiled again, smaller this time. "Could I get a medium coffee, please? And one of those blueberry scones if you have them. We're out of blueberry." "Oh, okay. The lemon one then." Brianna punched it in without a word, told her the total. The woman opened her bag slowly, hands a little unsteady. She was counting out exact change. Brianna watched her with her arms crossed, weight shifted to one hip, jaw working slowly like she had gum. "It's fine, just give me a card," Brianna said. "I prefer cash," and said, still counting. "It takes forever." Nolan set down his cup. He made himself breathe. He made himself stay in the stool. "Not yet." The woman paid. She found a seat near the window. Nolan watched her set her cane against the wall and arrange her things on the table with the deliberate care of someone who had learned not to expect much from people, but had decided not to let that ruin the small pleasures. She sat alone and waited for her order. Behind the counter, Brianna picked her phone back up. Nolan had been in this business long enough to know that what he'd just seen wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. The way Brianna had sighed, the words she'd chosen, the posture, that wasn't a bad day. That was a habit. That was practiced. That meant it had been happening long enough to become the norm in this store. And that meant someone in management had either permitted it, encouraged it, or decided it wasn't worth addressing. He ordered another coffee, just to watch. This time, Drew took his order. Drew was more careful, not warm exactly, but not hostile either. He said, "Here you go," when he set it down, which put him significantly ahead of the morning's curve. Nolan thanked him, and Drew looked vaguely surprised, like gratitude was something that happened in other stores. Nolan had hired Drew 8 months ago. He'd interviewed him personally. Drew had been enthusiastic, nervous in a good way. He'd talked about wanting to work in a place that felt like a community. He'd used that word twice, community. Something had happened to Drew in 8 months. Nolan stayed another 40 minutes. He watched Brianna ignore 2 more customers. He watched Drew begin to mirror her energy by the end of the hour. Less engaged, quicker to dismiss, moving through the motions like someone who had decided the motions were the point. He watched the woman in the yellow raincoat finish her coffee alone, wrap the remains of her scone in a napkin to take home, and leave without anyone telling her to have a good day. He drove back to his office and sat in the parking lot for a while before going inside. His VP of operations, a sharp woman named Celeste, found him in the conference room 20 minutes later, staring at a legal pad with nothing written on it. "How was it?" she asked. "We have a problem." He'd planned to go back once more, see if it was a one-day thing. He went back the next morning instead, earlier before the rush. He sat in the same stool, same zip-up. He ordered a pastry and didn't touch it. That was when he heard the conversation. He hadn't meant to overhear it. He'd been reading something on his phone when Brianna and a third employee, a newer hire named Petra, disappeared into the hallway behind the bar that led to the supply room. The door didn't close all the way. Voices carry in spaces like that, especially when people think they're alone. "Does Hendricks ever actually come in?" Petra asked. Brianna made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Hendricks sends emails, corporate stuff. He doesn't come in here, so nobody's actually watching." "Nobody's watching," Brianna confirmed. "Why do you think we do what we do? As long as the numbers look right, they don't care. They never care." Petra said something he didn't catch. "The customers?" Brianna's voice again. "Half of them don't say anything. They just leave and never come back. And the other half complain to the manager. And the manager is Kevin. And Kevin doesn't want the paperwork." Nolan put his phone face down on the counter. Hendricks was his corporate account manager, the name on all the inter-office correspondence that went out to store-level staff. His own last name, which he almost never used in day-to-day operations, was different. He'd built the company under a holding group name. Most employees at the store level had no reason to know who Nolan actually was. They didn't know who was sitting at the end of the counter. He sat there for a long time after the voices stopped. He thought about Mrs. Hopper. He thought about Drew in that interview, using the word community twice. He thought about 6 years of morning visits and a woman in a yellow raincoat counting exact change while someone sighed at her. He pulled out his phone and called Kevin. Kevin was the store manager. 29 years old, had been with the company 3 years, decent numbers, responsive to emails. On the phone now, his voice had the careful tone of someone who understood that a call from above at this hour was not entirely routine. "I'm going to need you to come in tomorrow morning," Nolan said. 7 o'clock. "Tell your team it's a staff meeting. All hands. Is something wrong?" "We're going to talk about culture," Nolan said. "Bring everyone who was on shift Monday and Tuesday morning." There was a pause. "Can I ask what this is about?" "I'll explain tomorrow." He spent the rest of the day thinking about how to do this right. He wasn't angry, or he was, but anger wasn't useful here. He'd made enough decisions in a state of anger over the years to know that anger made you feel like you were being precise when you were actually just being loud. What he wanted was clarity, for everyone in that room to understand, without any ambiguity, what the stakes were and what the standard was going to be going forward. He called Celeste back and asked her to pull the last 6 months of customer feedback for the Meridian location. She called him back 40 minutes later. Her voice was careful. "Nolan, there are 31 complaints in here that mention staff attitude specifically. 18 of them reference feeling dismissed or ignored. 6 of them mention a female employee by first name. Which name? Brianna." He wrote it down even though he didn't need to. How many of those complaints were formally escalated? A pause. 3. What happened with the other 28? Kevin marked them resolved. Were they resolved? Another pause. Longer this time. I don't think so, no. He thanked her and hung up. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote out everything he wanted to say. Not to punish, not to perform. To be honest about what had gone wrong and what was going to change, and to do it in a way that left room for the people who could still become something better. He also wrote down what he wanted to say to Drew specifically, because Drew was the thing that stayed with him, underneath the frustration and the 31 complaints, and Brianna's voice through a half-open door. Drew had walked into his interview with something real, something that could have grown in the right environment. And instead of growing, it had been quietly, steadily compressed. Not by cruelty exactly, but by a culture that had decided indifference was the easier choice, and had let that choice calcify until it became the air in the room. That was on Nolan. Not entirely. But enough. He showed up at 6:50 the next morning. Regular clothes. No one in the parking lot recognized him, which was the point, and also, if he was honest, the thing that had made all of this possible in the first place. He was not the kind of man people looked at and immediately saw authority. He knew that. He'd spent most of his career being underestimated in rooms, and he'd learned to use it. And somewhere along the way, he'd almost forgotten how much it still stung to be treated like you didn't matter, simply because of what you looked like when you walked through a door. He waited in his car until he saw the first employee arrive. Then he went in. Kevin was already there, near the back, looking like he slept. The staff filtered in over the next 10 minutes. Brianna, Drew, Petra, and 2 others from the morning rotation. They stood near the counter in a loose cluster, some with coffee cups, some with their coats still on. There was low murmuring. Nolan came in through the front door. No one recognized him at first. Brianna glanced at him the way you glance at a stranger who's walked into a private function, mildly annoyed, about to say something. Kevin saw his face and went still. "Good morning," Nolan's said. He said it to the room. He said it the way he wished someone had said it to the woman in the yellow raincoat. Kevin started to speak. Nolan held up one hand gently. "I want to introduce myself properly. My name is Nolan Briggs. I own this company. I've been coming into this store for the past 2 mornings as a regular customer, and I want to tell you what I saw." The room went very quiet. He didn't raise his voice. He told them, specifically and without exaggeration, what had happened at the counter on Monday morning. He described the woman with the cane. He described the sigh. He described 31 complainants marked resolved that weren't resolved. He described what Drew had looked like in his interview 8 months ago, and what Drew looked like now, and said plainly that that was a failure of leadership, his included, not just a failure of character. Brianna had gone pale. She was staring at a point somewhere between the floor and the pastry case. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," Nolan said. "I'm here because I built this company on a single idea, which is that the person who walks through that door is the most important person in the room the moment they arrive. Every person, regardless of how slowly they count their change, regardless of whether they're going to spend $3 or $300. The moment that idea becomes negotiable, we've already failed." He looked at Kevin. Kevin looked like a man reviewing every decision he'd made in the last 6 months. "Kevin, I'm going to ask you to step down from this location. I'm not letting you go. We're going to talk about what comes next, and I think there's a path forward." But I can't leave you in this role without a real conversation first about what happened here on your watch." Kevin nodded. He didn't argue. "Brianna," she looked up. "I've reviewed your record. This isn't the first time. I've been more than fair in the past, in ways I didn't know about. What I need you to understand is that this is the last time this gets discussed without consequence. You have a choice today about what happens next, but it depends entirely on whether you believe people deserve basic respect when they walk through that door. I need you to think about that seriously before we talk one-on-one." She said nothing, but she was listening, really listening, for what might have been the first time that week. He turned to Drew. "I remember what you said in your interview," Nolan said, "about wanting to work somewhere that felt like a community." He let that sit for a second. "I don't think we gave you that. I want to fix it." Drew blinked. He looked, suddenly, like the version of himself from 8 months ago, slightly unsteady, open. "I'd like to put you in a mentorship track," Nolan said. "If you're willing. That means working directly with our training team, and eventually, if you want it, moving toward assistant management. But it starts today. It starts with you deciding what kind of person you're going to be when someone walks up to that counter." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Drew said, "Yes, I want that." It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, but the room felt different after it. Nolan spent the rest of the morning in the back office with Kevin, then separately with Brianna, then with Celeste, on the phone going through what needed to change structurally across all 7 locations, not just this one. Mystery shopping, monthly culture audits, a direct line for employees to raise concerns without going through their immediate manager, a retraining program that didn't just cover procedures, but actually addressed how you made someone feel when they walked in. Brianna, in the end, did not quit. She sat across from him in the back office and was quiet for a long time, and then said something he hadn't expected. "Nobody ever told me it mattered," she said. "I know that sounds like an excuse, but I mean it literally. Nobody ever told me it mattered until right now." He didn't let her off the hook for it, but he believed her. "Some people are doing the minimum because no one ever showed them what more looked like. Some people are being unkind because they've been working in a place that treated unkindness as the cost of doing business. That doesn't excuse it, but it means the problem is bigger than one person, and the solution has to be bigger too." He drove back to the Meridian location 6 weeks later. Different day, same zip-up. He ordered a drip coffee, black, and sat at the far end of the counter. The person who took his order smiled. Not a customer service smile, the kind that's installed and then abandoned. "Good morning," she said. "Haven't seen you in a while." She didn't know who he was. She said it the way you say it to a regular, like his presence was a small, uncomplicated good thing. He picked up his cup. The woman in the yellow raincoat, he later found out, had come back. Mrs. Hopper had texted him to let him know, which meant she must have gone in the week before, and felt whatever it is you feel when a place has changed. Not everything that breaks can be fixed, but some things can. Sometimes it just takes someone sitting down at the end of a counter and paying attention long enough to understand what's actually wrong. The question is whether you're willing to do that before the people who trusted you stop coming back for good.